Raghunathan tam sajivam sadvetam savadutam parijana saritam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padhan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Om Agyantamirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadhamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Janmadyasya Yaton Bhayaditarata Shtarte Shrabhigya Swarat Tene Brahma Hridhaya Radhikavaye Muyanti Yatsurayah Tejo Varim Mridham Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Swena Sadhana Rasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi. Okay, let's look a little bit here at 6th Canto, Chapter 4. So as we mentioned before, the subject matter by predominance of topic is Poshanam. The word Poshanam literally means to nourish. And it speaks of how Bhagavan nourishes his devotees in this world who are, struggling in various ways and how he helps them basically. So with that being a predominant theme of the 6th canto, we hear stories like Ajamil. And now we're going to hear the story of Indra, who was the killer of his guru, and how the Supreme Lord also gives protection even to him. His guru's name was Vishwarupa, and Vishwarupa was the son of Twashta. And Twashta was the son of one of the daughters of Daksha. So we're going to hear about Daksha and how he gives, how he helps to populate the universe through his progeny, his daughters. And then the lines that come from his daughters will be given. And in that Twashta appears, and in that Vishwarupa appears. And in that we get to hear about this exchange between, or we won't call it an exchange, but this murder that took place and all of the wonderful pastimes that take place because of it. So that's in the next 3 chapters, 4, 5, and 6. At least we'll look at 4 and 5. I don't know about 6 yet. Okay, so chapter 4 is entitled the Hamsaguya prayers offered to the Lord by Prajapati Daksha. So the first passage is from verse 1, basically to verse 18. And therein we're basically hearing how the sons of Prachina Barhi, who we heard about way back in the 4th canto, his sons were the Prachetas. Prachina Barhi had instructed his sons to go perform austerities so that they can, before entering Grihastha ashram and giving the progeny, which is, I guess, a common practice that time. So they went to perform the austerities in one lake for, I don't know, like a long time. I think it was mentioned 10,000 years. So how they managed that, we just accept. They have the mystic ability. And during that time, they got darshan of the Supreme Lord, who was very pleased with their austerity, very pleased with their cooperation and friendship. I think there's some nice themes that come up there that were mentioned. So then they come out of the water and they see that the earth has been overrun by trees. And they become angry and start burning all the trees. So the presiding deity of the vegetation, his name is Soma. He's a deity of the moon. So he appears and says, yo, cool it, And he gives very nice statements and instructions. And then the Prachetas not being pacified, he finally gives them one girl and they become calm. So that is basically what we hear in the first passage. So we'll look at these verses. Some nice things come up, I think. Mostly we're hearing about the instructions of leaders or kings, and how they should take care of their praja, their citizenry, which includes the animals and which also includes the trees. That's basically some idea that we hear here, and a few other points. Okay, so we now look at all the Sanskrit of the verses, or just a lot of the verses are very straightforward. Not a lot of commentary has been given. Okay, so the blessed king said to Shukadeva Goswami, "My dear Lord, the demigods, demons, human beings, nagas, beasts, and birds were created during the reign of Swayambhuva Manu. You have spoken about this briefly in the third canto. Now I wish to know about it elaborately. I wish to know about the potency of the Supreme Lord of Godhead by which he brought about the secondary creation." So as you know, there's the primary creation, which is called Sarga, and the secondary creation, which is called Visarga. So the primary creation is the creation performed by Mahavishnu, manifesting all the various tattvas by which, there could be a material existence whatsoever. And the secondary creation refers to the creation done by Lord Brahma, where he takes those tattvas and assembles them in various ways to generate basically the world as we see it today or experience today. And it also refers to the Lord populating. The Lord here means Lord Brahma, populating the universes. That is also part of this topic of the secondary creation. So here, when he says, "I wish to know about the potency of the Supreme Personality of God by which he brought about the secondary creation," that means he wants to know how, it seems here, at least from how the topic is dealt with, he wants to know how the universe was populated. So things were generated. Now, how is the universe populated? So that's when you hear about the Manvantars and, you know, the progenitors of the species and how they, you know, generate the species and thus populate the existence. So looks like Parikshit Maharaj wants to know more about that here. Okay, so next verse, Sutta Goswami said, "O great sages assembled at Naimisharanya, after the great yogi Shukadeva Goswami heard King Parikshit's inquiry, he praised it and thus replied." Okay, next verse. So Shukadeva Goswami said, when the 10 sons of Prachina Bharhi emerged from the waters in which they were performing austerities, they saw that the entire surface of the world was covered by trees. So Prabhupada, in his commentary here, all the commentaries are brief, mostly for this section, but he points out how because there was no leadership, so leadership means the Kshatriya class, because Prachina Bharhi, he was instructed by Narada Muni to give up path of karma. So he did that and renounced the kingdom and went to perform austerity. While he did that, the Prachetas were still in the water performing austerity. So there was no one to lead the country. As a result, it seems that agricultural enterprises, amongst other things, was not properly tended to. And as a result of that negligence, the trees became much more in number. How that happened, no details given to that, but apparently the trees were allowed to overrun the earth because there was no one tending to the responsibility of clearing out the useless trees for agricultural enterprises. And so in the Prabhupada mentions that there is a distinction between useful trees and useless trees. So the useful trees, they give fruits and flowers. So this is used to maintain the living entities. For example, the flowers may maintain so many insect life, and fruits help to maintain the human beings. But then there are trees that don't produce fruits or flowers, so they're considered as useless trees, apparently. And so those trees can be used for building things. You cut them down, you make houses, you use it for fuel and so on. And then the land that is cleared from cutting down those trees can be used for agricultural enterprises, which helps to maintain the living entities. So this is the work of the Vaishya Varna, it seems. So because there was no king, I guess there was negligence of this dharma, this duty, because that is the how human nature basically is. That unless you're held accountable, there's a tendency to be irresponsible. So usually the two things go together: accountability and responsibility. So without any, and so someone is there, has to be there, generally speaking, to hold you accountable. Otherwise, one becomes a little lazy and then negligent. So there was, so the Kshatriya, his, because his, one of his primary dharmas is to protect the praja. And part of the protection of the praja is to make sure that they're doing their duties. So sometimes the king will call brahmanas in, and they would have to perform these yagyas to test the efficacy of their mantras. And if it didn't work out, that means that the brahmin was doing something, off, and he would be chastised. So in this way, the king will see to the protection of the citizenry in many ways, but one of the main ways is to make sure people are performing their duties. So of course, that's how society works also. A society can maintain its social integrity when the members of the society hold one another accountable. So like nowadays, in our disintegrating society, people don't like to be held accountable. So they've made nice vocabulary around that. They call it shaming. Anytime anyone holds them accountable for their nonsense, they say, "Why are you shaming me?" And that way you cannot say anything in the modern social culture, because somehow being shamed is considered an egregious sin, an egregious sin. But actually, that's how society actually works. The members agree to certain values. In the old culture, they follow Shastra Vidhi. And this new culture, I don't know what they follow. They make it up as they go along. And then you hold the members accountable. Those who want to participate in the society, you hold them accountable to those particular values. So, and especially the Kshatriya, the king, he has to do this work. So that wasn't there because Prachinabar he renounced and the Prachetas were in the water. So I guess the Vaishya Varna was a little negligent. So the usage trees were allowed to overrun the land. And I guess that took away agricultural space. And so when the Prachetas emerged from the water, they were very angry to see this. And well, what did they do? That's what we hear in the next verse. Now, next verse. Because of having undergone long austerities in the water, the Prachetas were very angry at the trees. Desiring to burn them to ashes, they generated wind and fire from their mouths. So yeah, here drumebhya krudyamanaste. So the Prachetas, they were very angry with the trees. Tapto dipita manyava. And that anger was inflamed because they have done a lot of austerities also. So manyava means the anger, dipita. So it became even more inflamed because of their tapasya. So Prabhupada mentions here in the commentary that tapasya, as a rule of thumb, makes one angry, generally speaking. Unless that austerity is devotional in nature. But otherwise, it seems as a rule of thumb or as a principle that tapasya makes one angry in nature. And just like you can see, if you have to fast and you don't want to, like every time a Kaddishi comes, very frustrating because you don't know when it's coming and then suddenly it comes. You're about to eat some toast or something, someone just comes up and says, hey, it's a Kaddishi. And then it made me become angry because of the austerity imposed upon you. So austerity means, this is like a general definition, means voluntarily accepting some suffering for a higher purpose. So that higher purpose can be anything, bhukti, mukti, bhakti, whatever it is, but some higher purpose is there. But austerity is there. It makes the heart a little bit inflamed by nature, a little bit angry. So Prabhupada mentions, he gives examples in the purport here of Hiranyakashipu and Ravana. They performed very severe austerities and they were very demonic in nature. And hearts became very, already hearts were very low, now become more inflamed because of tapasya. So this is why Srila Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says, generally devotees do not take shelter of Gyan and Vairagya and Tapasya, right? So the definition of Shuddha Bhakti is like this. Anyabilashita shunyam Gyana karma dhyanavitam, right? So it is not covered by Gyan, karma, etc. So that etc. means Vairagya, Tapasya, right? So it is not covered by the unfavorable forms of karma, Gyan, Vairagya, and Tapasya. So that means there are favorable forms of Gyan, karma, Vairagya, and Tapasya, but the unfavorable forms are rejected by the devotees. So there's so many types of austerities recommended in Shastra, but a lot of those austerities are for getting bhukti. So those are rejected by the Vaishnavas. They don't do the austerities for bhukti because those austerities will make the heart very hard. So that's why Rupa Goswami, he says that devotees generally don't, he said in the beginning, they may do a little bit Gyan Vairagya, a little bit, but they won't do it until they do a little bit in the beginning until they get a strong steadiness in their bhakti. Then after getting steadiness in bhakti, then they let go of these practices because it makes the heart very hard. That's what he says. The heart can become very hard. And then they just say shelter of bhakti, which also purifies like tapasya, but it keeps the heart soft because bhakti is very gentle by its nature. He makes verse like this toward the end of the Vaidhi Bhakti section and the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So anyway, here you see this, that the tapasya, they became angry at the trees and the anger was made more inflamed because of their tapasya. And so they began burning the trees with fire coming from their mouths and wind because they developed the mystic powers by doing tapasya. That was another thing. If you do tapasya, you develop mystic power, siddhi. So they had the mystic power. They began burning the trees. A little bit harsh. So Prabhupada in the commentary, I don't know if this applies to the Prachetas, but in his purport, he takes the angle that the devotees, even when they do tapasya, they don't become angry because they are Vaishnava. And Vaishnavas, I guess they don't get angry. That's what Prabhupada says. Of course, anger comes up, and there's another way of explaining that. But I guess as a general rule, the idea is that the Shabhargas, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, etc., Matsarya, the lust, envy, greed, pride, and so on, is called Shabharga. So these are controlled by the devotees, by their devotion, or they're transcended by the devotees. So with that, Prabhupada said, devotees don't get angry. They have all the good qualities. So when they are in a very difficult situation, the quality they events is forgiveness. So Prabhupada writes here, a sadhu, a devotee, is never angry. Actually, the real feature of devotees who undergo tapasya, austerity, is forgiveness. Although a Vaishnava has sufficient power in tapasya, he does not become angry when put into difficulty. So, yeah, in other words, tapasya is like a type of difficulty that's imposed upon one's existence. So the general tendency when a difficulty is imposed upon one's existence is become angry, right? If you become angry, it's just suddenly, like some debt comes suddenly or some problem comes suddenly, it's just imposed on you. You become angry. But a devotee is able to respond to the difficulties of life with skill and dignity and grace. And Prabhupada's highlighting specifically with forgiveness. I guess in the context of him just burning the trees, because the trees are helpless creatures, you're just burning them. So the devotee, seeing some difficulty, does not evince such qualities. Devotee here means an advanced devotee, not a neophyte devotee. So I don't know if that comment of Prabhupada applies here to the Prachetas. I don't know if he's making a comment about the Prachetas because they are also bhaktas. So I think Prabhupada is just speaking to his followers as a general. He's just giving us a little bit of enlightenment. He says at the end of the commentary that there's this technique or formula. Vaishnavas meet many opponents while preaching the glories of the Lord, but Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that they not become angry while preaching. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given this formula. Trinada, peace and Chena, etc. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself Lord in the straw on the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others in such a state of mind. One can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. I like how he says this is a formula. Normally, when we describe this verse, we say, well, this is the natural qualities of those who have nishtita bhakti. Then they are trinada pisanishana. And we usually use that as that understanding as an excuse to not have any good qualities. Well, I don't have nishtita bhakti, so what do you expect from me, Prabhu? But Prabhupada's calling it here as a formula that we are, I guess, in a sense, to practice this when dealing with difficulty, the imposition of difficulties. Then we are to respond with the dignity of humility, tolerance, and respect, and taking shelter of the holy names of Krishna. Good luck with that. Next verse. So he says here, next verse, my dear King Parikshit, when Soma, the king of trees and predominating deity of the moon, saw the fire and wind burning all the trees to ashes, he felt great sympathy because he is the maintainer of all herbs and trees. To appease the anger of the Prachetas, Soma spoke as follows. So Soma here is called as he's the presiding deity of the moon. And as Krishna says in the Gita, the moon gives nourishment to the vegetation on earth. So Prabhupada takes the opportunity here to dismiss that they went to the moon. And he's taking it on the evidence of this particular verse. He says that because Soma is the presiding deity of the moon and the vegetation, so how can we believe that there is no vegetation on the moon? If the moon, deity is nourishing the vegetation here on earth, how can we think there is no vegetation on the moon? That is Prabhupada's argument here. And so he says, this is proof. This is proof that they didn't go to the moon, because if they went to the moon, they would have saw vegetation there. Because the presiding deity of the moon is nourishing the vegetation, so there must be vegetation on the moon also. So I wouldn't present this particular argument myself to any person who is believing in that they went to the moon. I personally think that aluminum foil spaceship that they have, that you may have seen a picture of the ship that landed on the moon. It looks like one of the tents that I built in my room, with a little bit of aluminum foil, some milk cartons, and a blanket. Yeah, that fake spaceship. I think that's more or less self-evidence of some fakery going on here. Just look, if you just take a look at the picture, just like, there's no way these people went to the moon in this little toy car, dude. But in any case, we all have our arguments, I suppose, this way or the other. So there's Prabhupada's. What I appreciate about this commentary is the implicit faith in scripture that Prabhupada is having. The way he's using the logic here. Shastre yukto chanipuna. Sarvata drida nishtaya. Prodha shraddha adhikara ya asyam adhikarasya. So this is Sri Rupa Goswami describing he's describing the adhikar of the Uttama adhikari. All right. And so he says, Shastra yukto chanipuna. He is expert in Shastra and logic. Sarvata drida nishtaya. Because he studied Shastra in all ways, Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, he studied very deeply. So Drida Nishtaya, his convictions are very firm. And Prodha Shraddha, he have deep faith in what Shastra is telling. So that's what I kind of find funny and cute about this. Prabhupada saying, this is the logic. Shastra Yukti, this is the scriptural logic. Here is the presiding deity of vegetation. So how can there not be vegetation on his planet? So the very fact that we believe in a presiding deity is itself problematic for the secular world. But anyway, that is another thing. So this is Prabhupada's purport here. I had a nice giggle on it reading it. All right, next verse. So now Soma's responding, trying to pacify the Prachetas. So this is verse 7 through 18. Or I think verse 7 through 16 is him trying to pacify. So we look at these verses a little briefly here. He says, "Oh, greatly fortunate ones, you should not kill these poor trees by burning them to ashes. Your duty is to wish the citizens, prajas, all prosperity and act as their protectors." So especially this last line, Vivardha yishravo yuyam prajana patayashmita. So you are known as the protectors, patayashmita. You are known as the protectors of the prajanam. So the praja, again, the citizens means all the species, humans, aquatics, plants, mammals. They're all the praja. So you're the protector of all the praja. Vivardha yishravo yuyam. And you're supposed to exist for their increase, vivardha. Vivardha yishravo. You're supposed to protect and desiring their increase. Vivardha, like we have the word govardhana, for example. The word vardhana means a lot of things. It means to nourish. It means to expand. Like anandam buddhi vardhanam, right? Anandam buddhi vardhanam, the ocean of bliss is expanding. This word vardhana is coming there also, govardhana. So vivardha yishravo, you're supposed to desire their increase, right? So I think this means, how did Prabhupada take it? So he said, it is indicated here that the government and king has a duty of protecting not only human beings, but all the living entities, including trees. No living entity should be killed unnecessarily. Yeah, I also understood the word vivardha here because you have to desire their increase means like their population also. I know this is a big another one of the lies that we've been told from a very young age is that there's too much population. That's one of the big lies that Prabhupada was in his books. He often speaks out against this, but there's one of the big lies that they tell, that there's too much population. But actually, it seems, at least when you read sacred texts, not only in our tradition, it seems, but in other traditions also, the population is actually always a problem, and you always have to be attentive to it. Otherwise, it doesn't increase, it decreases. And if the population decreases, you can't maintain your civilization. So you're supposed to exist for the increase of the civilization, not the destruction of it or decrease of the civilization. So that is part of the work of protection that you're supposed to do. So why are you killing the trees? Because this is also required so that the living entities can be protected or vivardhana, like nourished. Especially, they need trees for building their houses, and of course the trees producing other things that are required for the living entities. Next verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is the master of all living entities, including the Prajapatis, such as Lord Brahma. Because he is all-pervading and indestructible, he is the all-pervading and indestructible master. He has created all these trees and vegetables as eatables for other living entities. So the imperishable Hari, who is Bhagavan, he is the master of everyone, Prajapati Pati, including Lord Brahma, who is the Prajapati Pati. And that personality of Gaia, Vanaspatan Oshadhishcha, so Sarjorjami Shamibu. That Vibhu is also another word here for the Supreme Lord, the Great One. He is the one who is given all the herbs and trees and plants for maintaining the living entities. Vanaspatan Oshadhishcha, so Sarjorjami Shamibu. So he's giving everything to maintain the living entities because they have to eat, right? Not only, I'm not talking about just human beings, but other species. They also use the trees for so much of their maintenance. So the Lord has given that. So your destruction of nature like this is an affront to the Lord, basically. That's the basic idea here. I think also he's pointing out that the Lord is all pervading. So this general point, understanding the immanence of the Lord. We usually call that as the Atma, right? Or Paramatma. The Lord is the soul of everything. So he's immanent in nature. That means he's everywhere in nature. So understanding God as a human and understanding that he's immanent in everything, then you have this practice called anthropomorphism, right? Anthropomorphism means when you impose the humanity onto non-human things, right? So for example, people anthropomorphize their cats and dogs, right? And the result of the anthropomorphization, that's probably a made up word, is that you relate to it empathically, right? So just like now, if you start beating a dog in public, people will attack you actually because they've anthropomorphized the dog and they see that as a transgression actually. Now, if you do the same thing to cow or pig, they may also actually attack you. But if you do it in private, they don't care. So anyway, anthropomorphization is a way of relating to the non-human entity in a way that's empathic. Um, so in Hindu culture, also you can say they anthropomorphize everything basically. So that allows them to relate to a tree, to a river, to a rock, empathically, right? Like we have Mother Jamuna, we have Tulsi plant, we have Govardhan Shila. So these are all non-human entities that devotees we anthropomorphize, and then that way we can relate to it empathically, and we serve them also, understanding that there's this imminent presence there that is worthy of our supplication, even in the case of these sacred items. But even if you don't believe in like a sacred deity of these, but just by seeing the Lord's evidence in everything and understanding the Lord is also human, you anthropomorphize and you see nature as not something to exploit, but something to respect at the very minimum. So here, pointing out the reality of the Lord's immanence in everything allows for a different relationship with nature, one that is not destructive, or say it conversely, because the modern world, secular as it is, and they've esteemed science, and science has no sense of the sacred. So there's nothing sacred about nature. There's nothing worthy of really respect. So the only relationship available to them is exploitation, which they do very nicely. And the result of that is everyone gets to suffer. So that is coming up. So this is interesting verse. Next verse. By nature's arrangement, fruits and flowers are considered the food of insects and birds. Grass and other legless living entities are meant to be the food of four-legged animals like cows and buffalo. Animals that cannot use their front legs as hands are meant to be the food of animals like tigers, which have claws. And four-legged animals like deers and goats, as well as food grains, are meant to be the food of human beings. So, as Narada says earlier in the first canto, Jivo Jivasa Jivana, right? One living entity is food for another. And the weaker species is food for the stronger. Or you can say the stronger species subsist on the weak. That's just the law of nature. It is unavoidable. So I guess in the context of the argument here, if you just destroy the subsistence of one species, then you're destroying, yeah, if you destroy one species, you're also destroying the subsistence of another species. And that way everyone gets to suffer. So that is the interesting thing about nature, is that the relationships are so intimate and interconnected that if one thing gets destroyed, everyone gets to suffer. Just like nowadays, I don't know all the relationships, but I nowadays people talk about like the bees, the bee population is going down. I'm like, okay.
What's the problem? But then when you hear about how bees are required to pollinate so many of the foods and that's required for food production and so on, then you realize, oh, wow, there's a very intimate relationship between all the species of life. That's why in Vedic culture, they have this system of yagya. Devarshi bhutatu nirnam pratrinam. Panchamaha yagya. There are yagyas to the devatas, yagyas to the forefathers, yagyas to the rishis, yagyas to other humans, and yagyas to other species, because the relationships are so intimate for maintaining the balance in nature. So if you destroy one species, as the Prachaitas are doing here, then you are also destroying the subsistence of another species. That means if they can't subsist, then they also go down. Then the species that subsists on that species also goes away. And that way it becomes like a domino effect where everyone gets to be affected. So I think this is the idea that fits here. This sense, the sense of where this verse fits in the argument that Soma is trying to give to the Prachaitas. You can't just like wipe out a whole species, because that means it's basically a affront to all of life. And that's something our world doesn't understand. Just like now we tolerate cow slaughter or chicken slaughter and pig slaughter, but that is actually a affront to all of life. And now we're suffering the consequences of that. Okay, next verse. O pure-hearted ones, your father, Prachinabarhi, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead have ordered you to generate population. Therefore, how can you burn to ashes these trees and herbs, which are needed for the maintenance of your subjects and descendants, right? So you were ordered by your father and by God himself to generate population. Again, this always seems to be a big topic in the old world. How are you going to populate? So not wipe out the population. Kind of reminds me of today. Therefore, how can you burn to ashes these trees and herbs which are needed for the maintenance of your subjects and descendants? Next verse. So the path of goodness traversed by your father, grandfather, and great grandfathers is that of maintaining the subjects, including the man, animals, and trees. This is the path you should follow. Unnecessary anger is contrary to your duty. Therefore, I request you to control your anger. So, atishta tasata margam. Follow satam margam. Just follow the good path, or the path of the saintly, the path that was followed by your father, your grandfather, and your great grandfather. You follow that path. Well, what path did they follow? He's saying that as the kings, they followed the path of protecting all the species. So you should follow that path. Kopam yachata dipita. And this anger you have, you should subdue it. The anger which has been inflamed, kopam dipitam, you should subdue that. So this is because there wasn't a schism between this generation and the previous generation. You can make an appeal to the wisdom and behavior of the previous generation in order to influence the mind of the present generation. Nowadays, you cannot do that. If you give an example of father or great grandfather, everyone they'll just laugh at you. But in a proper culture, there isn't this schism between generations. To honor the previous, that's one of the yagyas, right? Pitri yagya. To honor the forefathers is a very important part of the culture. So he's pointing them out in this way in his attempt to pacify them. Okay, as the father and mother are the friends and maintainers of the children, as the eyelid is the protector of the eye, as a husband is the maintainer and protector of a woman, as a householder is the maintainer and protector of beggars, and as the learned is the friend of the ignorant, so the king is a protector and giver of life to all his subjects. The trees are also subject to the king, therefore they should be given protection. So he speaks of 5 ways in which those who are in the position of protector protects their dependents. So he's giving me some different examples and saying, so like that, you are a king, you should protect the praja. This is your duty. Next verse. So the Supreme Personality of God is situated as a super soul within the cores of the hearts of all living entities, whether moving or not moving, including man, birds, animals, trees, and indeed all living entities. So antar deheshu bhutanam atmaste hare ishvara. The Supreme Lord Hari is the Atma situated within the bodies of all living entities. Okay. So therefore, you should consider every body a residence or temple of the Lord. Sarvam Tadishnam Ikshadhvam. You should see everything as the temple of the Lord, or that place in which the Lord is residing. So he's asking him to manifest a more metaphysical vision and not just be looking at the material body itself. By such vision, you will satisfy the Lord. You should not angrily kill these living entities in the form of trees. In this way, you will satisfy Hari. So he wants to point out, just like previously you satisfied Hari when you perform austerities in the water. So you should not now bring about his dissatisfaction by destroying his home. Right? This is the sense here. Previously you satisfied Hari. Now you should not displease him by destroying his temples in the form of the forms of the living entities. So if you give up this anger, seeing that the bodies of the living entities as the resting place of the Lord, then he will be very pleased with you. All right, last verses here. One who inquires into self-realization and thus subdues his powerful anger, which awakens suddenly in the body as if falling from the sky, transcends the influence of the modes of material nature. So how to give up this anger? This is interesting. He says, anyone who, so yasam mutpatatim deha akasham manyum ulbanam. So this very powerful anger, which is akasham. Akasham means like appearing suddenly, and just translate here, as if falling from the sky. Yasam mutpatitam deha. It's suddenly awakened in the body. The only vision I have of this is when I was in Florida. Um, I would go for walks in the morning, japa walks every morning, and it had stormed very badly the previous night, and I was walking underneath a tree, and suddenly I just collapsed to the floor because something like very heavy hit my head, and it was a tree branch. Because a lot of the trees, anyway, from the storm, some of the trees got hit very hard, and I guess some of the branches were not on there securely. So a pretty big branch fell off the tree and hit me in the head suddenly. And luckily, nothing like, I guess I have a very hard head, which speaks not only to my stubborn nature, but to the physiology of my head also. So I was unharmed by the grace of Krishna, but it hurt like anything. And just like out of nowhere, I was just walking my suddenly, oh. So the anger is appearing like that in the body. So how to pacify that? Atma jignasaya yachet. You should inquire into Atma, which is a very interesting sort of suggestion. And if you do that, saguna ativartate, then you'll be able to transcend the gunas. So usually, as Krishna says in the Gita about anger, krodha bhavati samoha. When anger arises, one becomes completely deluded. So deluded means you're not able to see what is right from wrong, basically. So here he's saying, if you put questions to that anger, Atma Jignasaya Yacha, specifically questions about Atma, he's saying here. I'm just going to extrapolate and just say questions in general. Then this way you'll be able to transcend the anger. Of course, if you inquire to Atman, then you can see the distinction between your mental state and your actual self. Saguna ativartate, and that way you can transcend the gunas. But because anger causes this problem of complete delusion, samoha, so he's saying here a method to deal with it is to put questions to your anger. Allow yourself to question your anger and to hear the answers to it. And if you put questions about Atman, then you can transcend nature here. Okay, so I think this is the last verse here. There is no need to burn. Oh, yeah, this is the last verse. There is no need to burn these poor trees any longer. Let whatever trees still remain be happy. Indeed, you should also be happy. Now, here's a beautiful, well qualified girl named Marisha, who was raised by the trees as their daughter. You may accept this beautiful girl as your wife. So it seems that all these previous attempts of pacification were not availing. So then he just gives donations and said, please take this girl. I think earlier we heard about this in the fourth canto, how Soma took the we did hear about this, right? Earlier in maybe it was in the fourth canto, how Soma took this girl that had appeared suddenly. I think he adopted her. Anyway, this girl who was, I guess, here said to be raised by trees. I don't remember the backstory here. I feel like we heard it in the fourth canto, but I don't remember the backstory. So anyway, this girl he is taking care of, he's giving now in marriage to the Prachetas. And that way, he's saying relax. So I think that that works. That ends up working, and they relax. So we're just gonna pause here and okay, see what's going on here. Okay, but we may not have the eyes to see the vegetation. Athena says, but we may not have the eyes to see the vegetation and the beings on the moon, just like one needs special vision to see ghost spirits, etc. Right. So you need a certain type of piety or vision to see the beings on the moon. So also you need a certain type of piety to go to the moon, at least according to Shastra. You can't just go to the moon. One can attain the moon by pious credits, not by paper thin spaceships. When Arjuna went to Indraloka, he needed special vision to see all the beings and the extravagance of the city. Right. Shivani says, I am grateful for today's reading through the Power Purport that said one shouldn't get angry while preaching. I had experience of becoming angry with someone who was arguing on the authority of the Vedas. He was saying Krishna is infinite and the knowledge is infinite. How can you box all principles in one box, Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam? There can be so many things that may not be mentioned in the scriptures we talk about, but are still authoritative. The Lord is infinite. There are infinite ways to reach him. He was not ready to listen to our arguments, and I got mad at him. I wish you get mad. My general principle when quote unquote preaching, first of all, I don't like to do it. Second of all, if I end up in a position where I'm talking to someone about Krishna conscious principles, if they talk more than me, then I just don't say anything. That is the easy approach. Because someone who's eager to talk can't be that eager to hear. So I just don't say anything. I just go, yeah, nice. Take this prasadam. It'll help you. Athena says this seems to say that deer, goats, and the like are okay for humans to eat. It is for some humans. So there are rules about that. So Prabhupada mentions that in his purport there also that some humans like Shudras or sometimes Kshatriyas also, they eat meat. So there are rules about how to do that also, which animals to eat and which rules to eat. So he says the difference between humans and animals is that the humans can control their impulses, the animals cannot. But with higher knowledge and intelligence, humans can control their impulses, without which they will bring about the destruction of their own selves and their societies. So therefore, they should follow Shastra Vidhi so that they don't destroy themselves and their communities. So if you have to eat meat because of your karmic predicament, then there are rules for that, and those rules should be followed. So yes, there are humans. Some humans do eat meat. Yeah, saying that certain animals are meant for eating for humans, that's permissible. Yes. Wow. Totally opposite argument. People say because population of a species may increase, and that's why to balance a food chain, we kill and eat them to control their overwhelming the earth. Yeah, they've been telling us this lie since we were kids, so it becomes harder to disbelieve it. However, here it is said by killing one species, actually, we are destroying another species that was to subsist in the first one, right? So, nature is already well balanced because it is created by the Supreme Lord. So, it is only because of human intervention all the problems are coming. We create technologies to make it easier and more convenient for one aspect of our life. And we don't realize the long term implications of what we're doing. And then when we get the right, that's what Prahlad Maharaj also says, Dukkho Shatam Taipi Dukkam. that their remedy for suffering is itself suffering. So, for example, just one example, the car. So a car was created so that we can remove an inconvenience in our life. We can move more efficiently from point A to point B. So, but as a result of that, so many other problems have come. Starting with the distance between point A and point B became very big. It begins there. Previously, everyone lived in like their villages. So the distance between point A and point B wasn't too far. Now they make it very, very far. And then you have to rape the earth to get the oil or to get the gas. You have to rape the earth like anything. And then now the result of that is, whatever they say, all these various gas emissions polluting the air and so on. Like you can see it in spaces like China and India is out of control. So for one inconvenience, you create some solution, which is itself a problem. And this way, the human interaction is causing the problem. They don't have faith in the way that God has done everything because they live for only sense gratification. So they're making their own imposition based on the sense enjoyment and creating an imbalance in nature. And then when the imbalance is created, they come up with all these excuses for why it's happening and bewilder the innocent people. And most people are like animals. They just believe whatever they're told. They don't do any investigation. They have no questions. So they're like animals, basically. And so then the poor animal like people just believe, oh, because of whatever lie is being told, they will accept it. And when in fact, there's these people doing their nonsense, creating these weird technologies to rape the earth and causing problem and then blaming the innocent people. So this is not very good. That's why Prabhupada is pretty strong on these sorts of things in his books. So this is such a beautiful statement. One who talks more than me, I like to be quiet. I will try to be pacified by meditating on this when I get angry. Mukunda, please stay away from big trees, Prabhu. We don't want delusion. After that happened to me, I was paranoid for like 2 weeks because there are a lot of trees in Florida. It's hard to get around them. So then I was like always looking up, like what are the branch falls? Luckily, it wasn't a bigger branch. I would have been finished. Okay. It looks like it says here Dana has a question, comment and question.
Thank you. I'll ask my question first. I just want to go back. You said that it's anthropomorphism for the Sheila and Tulsi Devi, but I guess I'm quite shocked or I'm confused about that statement because it is Tulsi Devi. It is the Devi in kind of like earthly form. It's not that there's this random plant that will remind us of this Devi. It's actually her personified. So when we worship, it is her. It's, and even the Sheila, it is Vishnu. It's not that it's meant to invoke our remembrance of it. It is actually the spirit or Vishnu itself.
Yes, we accept because we are devotees. But I'm saying either way, it is still anthropomorphism, right? Because as far as material eyes tell us, it is a rock or it's a river or it's a plant. But we know it is more than that. We know it is actually Devi or Deva, and we relate accordingly. So Devi and Deva is a human, so we relate like that. So either way, it's anthropomorphism, and that way you relate respectfully. In our case, we relate, um, we relate as devotees. We worship. So either way, it is anthropomorphism, but it is not a negative thing. So usually this word anthropomorphism was taken as negative, especially due to the influence of Abrahamic traditions, where they have they're very uncomfortable with the notion of form, especially form of divinity, which they largely, well, at least historically, have spoken out against, calling it idol worship and so on. So somehow in the Western culture, even when it became more secular, the notion of anthropomorphism was largely linked to something very negative. So, but there have been recent studies to show how important and powerful that is. That it allows one to relate to the non-human. So Devi or the Lord Deva, they are also non-human, right? They are part of the internal energy, so they're not really human. So how we will be able to relate to them? Well, we anthropomorphize, right? Even though we say God is human, like we say, Krishna says, Manusham Tanumashritam. When I come taking, my human form. So we say he is a human, but that is only analogous at best, because Krishna's humanness is nothing like our humanness. So when we say God is a human, what does it even really mean? Just like saying God is the color of a monsoon cloud, but the color of the internal energy is nothing like the color of the external world. So what does it really mean? So in one sense, at best, are saying, and my point is God is non-human. Even he has human form, but he is not human in the way that we are forced to understand the word human when we say it. That word human itself is filled with so much limitation, which cannot apply to God whatsoever. Still, when we relate to God as human, that allows us to relate in a way that's affectionate and empathetic and sacred and worshipable. So it's a very nice thing. This anthropomorphism is not a negative thing. So that's the point that we were trying to bring out. And for those who don't believe in these deities manifesting in this particular form, the anthropomorphism is also important for them, so that they can relate to nature around them in a way that is not destructive. So that was the point we wanted to bring out. Otherwise, the only relationship is a destructive one. You start burning everything down, poisoning the water, raping the earth for materials and so on. So it becomes very dangerous.
Thank you. I'm curious if you can comment. I love your explanation, and I'll hold that in my mind for any, I guess, further discussions with for Abrahamic religions. But even in what you had mentioned, for example, the humanness relating to him as a human allows us to have affection, etc. I would say that some hearing this would say, well, then you need this anthropomorphism because you're not even like the Mayavadi. It's like a crutch. You're not able to develop love for God automatically. So therefore, you must see him as a being or a human to develop. But if you're advanced enough, you can develop these emotions without having to see him in a form or as a.
How you will develop? Like anyone can say anything. How you will develop?
Well, you see in the Abrahamic religions, they do develop a deep love for what they think is God without having to have, like, see them as a person or a being.
No, they see him as a person. Well, at least in Christianity,
Right.
they
Yes.
see Jesus is there. And also actually in all the traditions, they refer, when they talk about God, they speak about his qualities of this, that, and the other, very human qualities, or at least very human notions of those qualities. They are also anthropomorphizing. They just get upset when we actually make a form out of the earth or whatever. Like Islam, they get upset. They destroy the Murtis in India historically, even though they themselves, they worship a big rock. They go to Mecca, some big black rock is there. Maybe it looks like Shiva Linga. Who knows? It might have been before they conquered some area. And they circumambulate it. They offer obeisances to it and so on. What's going on there? It looks like a little bit of idol worship going on there. So they also anthropomorphize, actually, even though they don't think of God like we say Krishna, for example, but they're also anthropomorphizing. They're saying God is very compassionate. That is a human concept. At least they don't know any other concept of the word compassion. We don't know an internal energy concept of the word compassion. So when we hear the word compassion, like in the statement, God is compassionate, for example, that means that our understanding of compassion is necessarily a human understanding. which means that they're anthropomorphizing God by saying God is compassionate. So everyone does it, actually. It is inescapable.
Right. Thank you so much. I really love your explanation. And I'll just say, speaking to some Muslims, they believe that God is personal, but not a person. But yet, your explanation was really great that, Krishna coming down in human form, it's not our human being understanding. He is not human. But I just really loved your explanation. And that is in line with what they think as well. Thank you.
Okie dokes.
I want I guess my last comment was actually about the population control. And lastly, in the Asian culture, both East and South Asian, it's historically been the view is that men are more valued than women. So I heard that, I mean, there was a one in China, like the one child policy, but they would kill females when they would come out just because they valued men much more. But then as time progressed, there's this huge generation of just men with no women to marry. So they had this huge predicament. But there was this one researcher who had kind of, through algorithms, predicted kind of the human population that would be healthy. And he was saying that there were 1 million people that were missing. And that's because of all the killing of female babies. And of course, not reproducing properly with the lack of them. But it's just kind of tampering with God's creation and his order. And again, the soul is implanted. Well, no soul can come into being without God sanctioning it. So in one sense, it all kind of works perfectly. And here we're trying to population control, and there are a lot of problems with that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we should just follow more natural course of living, but we don't. So this is our problem. This is our disease. We want to be controllers, and we want to be enjoyers. God is the actual enjoyer. We want to be an enjoyer, but in order to enjoy, you have to control. So humans get obsessed with this gathering of power so they can control. And that way they think that I'll enjoy nicely. And that way they keep messing with nature. And the result is we're getting more entangled in her complexities, as Prabhupada writes. So then they start making up all these theories like there's too much population, and people believe that. And then, of course, you would believe that if you cram into a city like New York or Delhi or Tokyo, you would believe there's too much population. But if people lived more naturally and you use all the land, there's plenty of space for everyone, actually. So we believe all this nonsense and follow it. And then they will say, because there's, first they said, who was telling in the chat box? They say, oh, because so the species won't overrun the other ones, we have to kill it. So now they're saying just about the animals, how long before they say that about the human beings? And now they're saying there's too much human population. So then the same logic that they apply to the animals, they will apply to the human beings also. Right now it is considered taboo. You can't say it outright. But they must be thinking like this. They already think it. They demonstrated, of course, in relationship to the other species. So in only a little bit more time, then they will start openly saying we have to kill so much part of the population. They'll probably start with the old people because they can't work. So they'll be happy to kill them off. And then they'll start, some sort of eugenics program will be probably instituted. And then they'll probably say, you have to have a certain level of intelligence in order to participate, a certain level of strength, a certain level of this or that. And then that way they will start killing off the humans also. It is the natural outcome of this sort of thinking. Agape says, the anger purport seems to me to be potentially misleading, as you said, to portray this were devotees. I have had other experiences like this when reading Shastra. Srila Prabhupada makes a point in the purport that creates a, quote, conflict with the verse or narrative. Not knowing when to take a point Srila Prabhupada is making independently seems to me to be a potential obstacle to hearing, maybe fall under pedagogical ignorance. No, so basically, our challenge is that, Shastra is meant to be heard from our guru. Then all these sorts of discrepancies, you can just ask them point blank. Shastra itself, if you study it, if like we knew Shastra nicely, it means Sanskrit nicely, we know it, and you study it, there are contradictions everywhere. So the scholarly or scriptural exegete, exegesis means basically means scriptural hermeneutics, like the way scripture should be interpreted. They use this word exegesis. So the scriptural exegete is one who is, applying the exegesis. That the work is to reconcile these apparent disparate or contradictory statements. So that was for example, the purpose of Vedanta Sutra. And the Upanishads, you have so many statements, some of them seem to contradict. So Vedanta Sutra wants to reconcile all of that to show that actually there is samanvaya, there is harmony between all these statements. So that happens also when reading commentaries and so on. So you have to be a little smart and just reconcile like that. But yeah, naturally, when we read, all sorts of confusions come to us. And because we're supposed to just hear them from our guru, and then we can just put the question to them point blank. So, all right, Mother Gal, you have something, and then we'll.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I'm so happy Athena asked that question. I had the same question about applying anthropomorphism to like the Sheilas and Tulsi Devi, but your explanation was so beautiful. My question though is going back to when you were talking about anger falling from the sky, and I'm giving myself away already. I know. So, what was the process? Ask yourself why you're asking, which is like sounds practically impossible in such a situation. But.
Yeah, so that's why I was also I kind of smirked when I read the verse, because I was like, who can do this? But he was saying that when the anger comes like that, then you have to put questions to it. So as I mentioned, Gita Krishna says the anger causes complete delusion. So which means the inability to discern. Samoha in the verse, well, at least according to some of our commentators, means the inability to discern, like discern right from wrong, for example. Like sometimes when people get angry, they say, I can just kill you, and then they do it. That means an inability to discern right from wrong in that moment of anger. So here, Soma is saying you have to put the question to anger. And question it, do the investigation. And he specifically says Atma Jignasaya. So you question about Atma. I guess the main lack of discernment is discernment between our emotional states and who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you question about the actual self, then I guess that's supposed to help bring about the discernment. I just took a little bit of a broader thing also. So just generally asking certain questions. And usually we're not able to do it. So it's always helpful to go to a person and to vent, a friend or a superior, and vent and have them put the questions to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then the questions that we won't be able to ask ourselves, perhaps because the anger is too much inflamed. So you go to a friend or a superior, someone you trust, and you vent to them and then have them put the questions to you. And usually just in that process, the anger, of course, will calm down a little bit. And then when you're having to supply reasonable answers to someone who's detached from your situation, which means they're likely to be more objective because they're detached from your situation, then you're able to discern properly and take a better course of action. So,
of course, as long as you haven't already killed the person. But
yeah,
anyway,
assuming you haven't already killed the person. So, as a general rule of thumb, anger, at least as we encounter in the Gita explanation, is due to frustrated desire. So that means suffering, in short. You have a desire that was frustrated, now you're suffering. So as with all suffering, as a rule of thumb, we have to figure out how to respond to that with greater skill and dignity. I've been saying this a lot this year. It's kind of been a recurring theme for me this year. how to respond to suffering with dignity, like how to suffer well. We suffer very poorly. So how to suffer well. And the anger is just another form of suffering. My desire was frustrated, I become silent. So how do I suffer well? So if you figure out how to suffer well in one area, you'll figure out how to suffer well in all areas. So the real question to explore, and this is like basic spirituality. You probably could say this is spirituality 101, because most people are coming to the spirituality because of suffering. So it's like basic spirituality. Even though it's basic, it doesn't make it less profound necessarily. It's just kind of fundamental. It's to discover the answer to how to suffer well. If you figure out that answer to in any domain, because we suffer in many domains, if you can figure out how to suffer well in any one domain, then you understand how to suffer well in all domains. So we just need to figure that out. Now we're being told by Shastra how it's done. For Bhakti Shastras, take shelter of the Lord and so on. But we have to contemplate it deeply and really assimilate that and then do it. So when the suffering comes, we're like, all right, this is my chance now to, do better. I got a big old F last test. And the one before that, 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 the one before that. Now let me try to get. Let me at least go for a D-. And that way, try to improve gradually.
No, there was what's his name? I forget what his name is. Some rap artist. He got all F's on his report card. He went back to his teacher to complain. He said, "You better throw some D's on there."
I didn't hear that, but that's hilarious. You better throw some D's on there. So Krishna waiting for us to get some D's. He's like, come on, man. You've been getting L's for a long time now. Now you got all this knowledge. I gave you association with my bhaktas, give you all this knowledge. Try to at least get a D. Aim high for you. At least go for the C-. And that way, as the youth say these days, do better. A common thing. When you're if you say something like considered racist or homophobic or misogynist, they say do better. So here, you do better, and then we're almost suffering. Do better. Okay, we'll pause here for today. Try to do some more tomorrow. Haryam Tat Sat. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hari Hari Bol.